and welcome to the latest podcast episode. Today I'm here with a group of smart buildings experts, and I'm really interested in today's topic. It's a little pet interest of mine, but we're going to be talking about smart buildings and specifically how smart building technology is transforming spaces that are run by public sector organisations. So I think there's some really practical insights coming today, which I'm excited about. But first, why don't you start by introducing yourselves and we'll go from there?
Sure. So really glad to be here. My name's John Monaghan. I'm an SE, a systems engineer with Cisco. And as you've just alluded to, I specialise in smart buildings with a specific focus on our partners and public sector as well.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Rajit Rangachiva. I'm the Intelligent Workplace Practice Lead at ITGL. In my scope of work, I help companies build intelligent, connected, future-proof workplaces.
Brilliant. I bet you got some good war stories there.
Yeah, and I'm really pleased to be here as well. My name's Nick Gray. I'm a solutions engineer, just like John, and I sit across the whole portfolio, but have a large background in collaboration and have been working with smart building technology for the last couple of years.
Nice. Yeah, there's some fascinating capabilities in there, aren't there? So why don't we start at the beginning? So talking about how smart building technologies are actually helping the public sector meet sustainability commitments, because obviously that's a big drive for everybody at the moment, but also balancing that against those really tight budgets that we know the public sector are increasingly being forced to work with. So I don't know who wants to go first, but
I'll put my hand up. So one of the things that I've certainly learned, and this is obviously working with John and the wider team, but actually a lot of the budgets can be created by the energy savings and the sustainability gains that you find. Some stats for you, I'm straight in there with the stats, but 52% of all energy used by businesses is based on air conditioning and heating and lighting.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine, if you've got a substantial amount of energy use and the cost of energy, if you can start to use technology to automate those services and make the places smart, what you tend to find is that can help with the investment in the technology. So I suppose that's my
some good quick wins there, I would imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, just to back up what Nick's saying, I think there is a danger that everyone kind of overcomplicates it. And there's a lot of measures that our public sector customers can put in place that can pretty quickly achieve really good returns and results. And we'll probably go into some more detail here, but a key ability is the ability to measure. So the examples that Nick has just provided there, a lot of customers are in the dark, so to speak, and they really need help being able to measure those different properties like energy consumption. And that's often the starting point.
Like identify patterns.
Identify patterns, even we use the term baseline, which creates a kind of profile of the property or the building, and focuses in on the big energy consumers. So when it comes to sustainability, there's a huge topic, but as Nick quite rightly has said, we rapidly kind of zero in on energy, and that's the biggest. The second biggest cost, there's another stat. So the second biggest cost to any organisation, whether it's public or private sector, is energy.
Yeah.
Right. And you and I, the employees, they're the primary cost. So helping our colleagues in the public sector, especially in the facility and estates department, we'll probably go into that as well.
Yeah.
So there's some very, very key individual, worker profiles that we need to be aware of and we need to interact with. But helping them get that baseline, is absolutely critical.
So they know where they're starting from.
They know where they're starting from, and absolutely, and I'll keep saying it, you'll get bored of me saying it, but it really doesn't have to be complicated. And we'll give some examples of how we can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you correctly mentioned, public sector organizations are under immense pressure, right, to meet their sustainability commitments. And on the other hand, they are again operating under tight budgets, right? So I think the smart building technologies will help them. For example, with Cisco infrastructure, we can unlock the potential into the Cisco infrastructure and help them. That's where I think smart buildings plays the bigger picture. So, for example, if we get now in most of the public sector organization, they control the heating or the cooling on kind of a fixed schedule, right? But with the help of the network, we can get that insights onto occupancy and space utilization and dynamically control this heating and cooling, even lighting, so that companies, organizations can save on energy.
Yeah, because the public sector has a lot of different types of properties, don't they? And a lot of varied uses. You know, if you think about local government, blue light services, for example, there's lots of factors there, aren't there?
Oh, huge. And some of these properties are very old.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we're talking in some cases where some of the hospitals we're going back to the Victorian age. I mean, it's quite incredible.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot of kind of sympathy with the property team who are responsible for managing those properties. And because these properties are old, and even the ones that are not so old, they weren't developed at the time with all the best practices that we now have available to us in terms of different types of heating system, different types of insulation, and of course, different types of technology like sensors. So we have to be able to accommodate, as you correctly say, all these different types of properties. And we'll probably talk about it more, but this idea of retrofitting properties with technology is critical because we can't just concentrate on new buildings because that's a tiny, tiny fraction of the problem.
Yeah. And how much awareness is there of that need to retrofit? Because I know with smart buildings, a lot of the conversation obviously starts around lighting and simple things, not smart buildings, but just energy efficiencies around changing the types of bulbs, for example. So how do they balance like some of those quick wins to get where they need to go, but then also set themselves up, as you were saying about retrofitting, for kind of longer term benefits? Because to get to net zero, there's a lot more that has to be done.
Yeah. I mean, I'll go quickly. There's definitely we would call it a kind of pathway here. And it's not mandatory, of course, for a customer, to adopt that or follow that pathway.
It gives them a guide.
But it gives them a guide, absolutely. And it goes along the lines of let's get that profiling and baselining in place.
Yep.
Let's analyze what is the data actually telling us. And like 9 times out of 10, it will identify immediate opportunities for savings. So then you're into a phase of what we would call optimization, using that data. Then we look at, what further improvements can we make? And in the case of retrofitting, that's usually along the lines of automation. So Rajit can talk to you about the services that ITGL provide there. And that will be, again, along the lines of using the data that the network is collecting and feeding that data over into other control systems.
So this is automation of heating, lighting. So when it's low occupancy,
yes, exactly.
That's it.
It adapts.
That's it. And by the time you've got to that third phase, you've already ideally made considerable improvements. And all the time you're chipping away at your sustainability targets as well. So there's loads that can be done in what we call this retrofitting scenario. And then there's the optimal, which we'll probably come on to as well. So there's, as you were alluding to, there's a lot of clever things that we can do around the management and the delivery of power to different parts of the building as well. I don't know if you want to add to that, Rajit.
Yeah, so on the point of power, so I want to highlight that with Cisco infrastructure, now we can power the end user desks, the laptops, the machines, even the mobile phone charging through PoE, right? DC PoE. Wow. I think John will be able to give more insights to that. So we have that
device level as well as like the larger systems.
So because as John mentioned, now these are kind of very old buildings and very old power circuits what they have. It's very difficult to like bring and put a new power socket, right? So it's very easy to use the Ethernet cable to power everything you have rather than using the power sockets or power cabling, because one thing is...
so you use the network to create the power that's needed.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And one thing is because we are using low voltage with the PoE, there's no nothing to be afraid of electrocution or something like that. And we don't need to have electrical engineers. We don't need to kind of adhere to safety standards as well.
And cost of maintenance must drop down.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think just to jump in there as well, there's also the amount of sustainable materials that are going into that. So instead of having a twin earth, traditional electrical socket being installed, as Rajesh says, you're deploying effectively Ethernet cables to all the outlets. We're even going a step further at Cisco, where we've got this new thing that's been patented as we speak called fault managed power. And this is where we're taking up to 300 watts instead of the 90 watts as well, right? So what you're seeing is, as Rajesh said, the ability to power a PoE desk that raises up and down, a handset that we've done for many years, a monitor. I've seen 40-inch screens through some of the partners that ITGL. So I think something that we presented at Cisco Live, which ITGL attended, is this whole type of environment with lights, desks, pretty much everything you saw was powered from the switch. And one of the questions probably no doubt later will be, well, how do you make that resilient and all those types of things, right? But I suppose there's so many kind of options that you've got now that people just aren't aware of. And I think that's the key thing of having these conversations, to just highlight the opportunities.
The capabilities, because that must unlock savings, as you were saying, on a number of different levels. Because I do think with smart buildings, people sort of do look at the obvious ones, but like you say, there's a lack of awareness, I think, about how the technology can help them.
Yeah, that's a massive part of what the three of us do almost on a daily basis. Is raising the awareness. And again, the property teams that we interact with, they're just so busy. So we got a lot of sympathy for them.
And if we can help them prioritize.
We can help them, exactly, and if we can get some of their time, then we can have a workshop with them and just take them through what we would call the art of the possible. Because this technology is changing all the time. And going back to my kind of comment about the pathway, once they understand that it doesn't have to be complex, and we can help them literally within the next month or so, we can help them. They really sit up and take a lot of interest. They get really interested, and often these teams, they're not technologists per se. They're not involved in the networking industry or the IT industry.
Because I suppose it's facilities.
It's facilities in the States, Charlotte. So again, we have to be very cognizant that we don't want to get start going off at tangents into the world of networking that maybe doesn't mean an awful lot to them. So we have to learn to almost speak a different language, the language of the property world. But on that point, as I'm sure Rajit and Nick will agree, there's a few kind of best practices that you'll hear us talk about, and an absolute best practice is getting the IT department and the estates department in the same room.
I was going to ask that when you said about that dichotomy between the two. It's like, IT must be a crucial part of this if you're using the network to create that power.
It's crucial. It's absolutely crucial.
I think the other thing as well, estates hold a lot of the budget as well. So from a budgeting perspective, you tend to find IT have a much smaller budget, but we wouldn't just take it to IT and estates and facilities, HR, sustainability. And what you tend to find, and I've seen this, is those individual teams don't typically work together. So
they're quite siloed.
And one of the things that Rajif and ITGO and the team at Cisco can do are these kind of design thinking workshops where we work with the end customer to kind of help them work together. And what I found in my experience is facilities don't necessarily know the capabilities of some of the technology. You know, the networking team don't realise the challenges for them. And when you get everyone in one room, it actually is a bit magic.
It must make a massive difference. Yeah, because also as well with sustainability, you can end up doing something over here, which then has a negative or, you know, increases the carbon use over here when you're not joining all those dots together.
Well, I've got a fantastic example of where that's worked really, really well. And it is amazing the kind of conversations that you end up having when you get the two groups in the same room at the same time. And we did a project recently for a hospital in the northwest of the country, and the estates department were kind of having a watching brief on what was going on, and a lot of input as well. And they presented us with another problem or use cases. We tend to use that term.
Yeah.
This was around water management. And we often almost forget about water.
Yeah.
But water is one of the key utilities.
Come to mind, does it?
And it's now become a big part of sustainability agendas. So water leaks,
And
water
waste.
damage, water waste. And there's also in fact, for any organisation, there's also a legal requirement to test all the water outlets for health and safety reasons, for compliance against the prevention of Legionnaire's disease.
Well, especially in hospitals.
And especially in hospitals, of course, much more so. And long story short, unbelievably, what's happening is the estates department are literally paying someone in their own team or paying a plumber literally to go around running taps and taking flow measurements with a thermometer and a flow meter. And they said they knew that this was very inefficient, right? I mean, so they said, look, our eyes have been opened as to the power of technology, what else it can do based on what things that we're doing in the hospital. Could you help us with this? And then I didn't have an immediate answer, but I was fascinated by the use case. Yeah. Because I'm thinking, this is crazy, right? What? I mean, we're in 2025 and we're paying
that does sound
plumbers.
Victorian, doesn't
That does sound Victorian. And, you know, lo and behold, there is a solution to automate pretty much all of that task.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Go on, Richard.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say is that now these technologies and the outcomes we talk about revolves around the network infrastructure, right? So we traditionally thought about the network as a for the connectivity as well as maybe for your collaboration, voice and video, right? But now the network is the foundation for smart spaces. So basically what we say is network as a sensor, right? So the APs you see on the ceilings, on the walls or somewhere, it's basically a sensor now. So the APs can detect assets, locate people, see
equipment,
the understand the utilization of the space, can be used as a gateway for third-party sensors. So, and also when it comes to collaboration, Cisco WebEx devices as well, right?
Yeah.
So these are also like now sensors. So they have inbuilt sensors to detect occupancy, detect presence, understand.
Could protect assets too, I guess, from going off site. And
I think that's important in hospitals, right?
Yeah.
Rajif and I have spoken about this a lot, where you can get quite low cost stick-on sensors that go on, for instance, wheelchairs.
Yeah.
And another saving that is not necessarily impacted by energy costs, maybe in time and people energy, is how many porters across these Victorian buildings, and I've seen it in Leeds where I'm based, where they have to find a bed or a particular device.
Yeah.
My wife's actually a cardiology sister, and she explained to me that if they cannot find a particular device in a certain period of time, they just go out and buy another one, which is crazy, right? So I think a lot of these use cases that Rajif talks around, whether it's our devices or even the third-party ones, so there's many third-party ones available that connect to our network. I think they're really important. Other use cases I've seen is you see where babies get swapped over accidentally.
Yeah,
right?
I was thinking that because and incubators and.
So you can literally get these throwaway sensors that are very low costs. Obviously, from a health and safety point of view, you can't reuse one of them.
No.
It's a bit like the label you would wear if you entered the hospital. and the ability to kind of track a person, and also transmission control as well, right? So obviously we had COVID a number of years ago, like a blip, but the reality is if we knew the 4 of us were within a vicinity, within our access points, we can track to around about 30 centimetre accuracy. So the ability for you to wear like a lanyard as a doctor, so Charlotte's the doctor and us 3 are patients, you will be able to check with, and these are third parties that connect to our networks, but be able to detect exactly where those people have been and pull a report on it. So again, we don't need to spend millions on creating an application that ultimately happens, but the reality is in those kind of work settings, I think there's lots of use cases, not just the turning the lights on and the heating, as Rajesh says. And sometimes it might not be our sensor, right? The underlying thing is the network is, and I think it's John's phrase that we pinched, but the network as a sensor. And then you start to add on the various parts, because someone may have taken a route down a collaboration route with a different vendor. They may have gone with, a different type of access point or something like that. So I think what we can do as Cisco and ITGL is take people on a journey. And I think that's the most important thing.
Totally.
So let's mention the L word, legislation, which is a big issue in public sector, and I would imagine something they have to think about quite a lot. So thinking of some of those examples of what you've seen in various public sector organisations, how much of that is driven by legislation, and what kind of legislation?
So it's a really great point, Charlotte. And up until now, I think most organisations have been adopting sustainability practices because they know it's A, the right thing to do, but also B, they know that it can help them reduce their operating costs as well. But we are now, so you would traditionally think of that approach as being, the carrot, right? But now we're moving into an era where there's more legislation being developed all the time, so it's more into the stick approach. And ultimately it'll be a combination of both. But just to give, and this is an area that's very dynamic, so the new government are introducing more legislation. But just to give a couple of quick examples, so Nick touched on and Rajiv touched on our ability, as in Cisco ITGL, to actually help customers with systems like lighting. So lighting is not an area that you would traditionally think of with Cisco and ITGL. Like, what have we got to do with lights, right? But actually, as it transpires, lights are a big energy consumer. But the way in which we power and manage and control lights is I would argue, a little bit outdated. And it can be made very, very efficient. But one of the legislative drivers for that is the fact that it's now basically illegal to sell certain types of fluorescent and halogen lights.
And in older properties,
there's loads of them. I mean, no one really knows how many, but from a sample poll that we conducted of our hospital, this is just hospitals, never mind all the other public sector buildings, 70% of them come back and say we've still got a lot of fluorescent lights.
Wow.
And what it means is that that's basically a ticking time bomb. Because if those lights fail, and they do, you're allowed to carry spare parts, but you can't buy excess stock.
Have to replace them.
So if they don't have a replacement part ready at hand, that part of the building would get shut down.
Oh, so they wouldn't even be able to use it?
No, because health and safety at work, the Health and Safety at Work Act requires certain light levels for different types of tasks.
So they've got competing legislation almost.
They've got competing legislation. So the natural thing to do there, of course, would be you would have to, formulate a plan, right? You'd have to go out and survey all your buildings and your assets and find out how many of that and work out a plan. And again, without getting into all the details, we believe, Cisco and ITGL, we've got a technologically superior way of replacing those lights
Right.
that reduces costs. It's safer, as Rajiv was implying.
Faster deployment.
Faster deployment.
And proactive.
Lower risk and lower energy consumption.
Yeah.
Everything.
All of it.
All of it.
The whole shebang.
So that's a really, really great example of where legislation is applying a pretty strong lever.
Yeah. The other one that I believe we're trying to help change, but I've certainly seen is emergency lighting. So, you know, the little green running man or woman, I suppose it's typically
Person.
Yeah. But with those ones, so we've got a number of building pods within our Cisco locations that Rajiv and the team have seen. But one of the things that I learned through this process was the amount of times that facilities need to check that emergency lighting is working. Now, I believe as of today, because you need backup batteries on them, and we again don't make these lights, but third party companies do. The ability to run reports and know if these lights are working, the backup batteries have that information. We can pull all that.
So like the plumber, you don't have to have someone going out there and physically checking.
That's what happens. That's what Nick's probably alluding to.
Yeah.
So the reality is, you know, people in facilities are having to check every single month to check that these exit signs are working. Quite rightly, from a safety point of view, but my understanding is that it's not quite legislation yet to power those from the switch. So from our point of view, doing things like this and having conversations with the government, and no doubt Cisco definitely have those conversations around how we can deliver technology to improve things. I think the more we can get this message out and start showing people the technology, but not only that, the enhancements to make their life easier. Because again, I learned through that process that, you know, one of the customers that I've worked with, the amount of time that it takes them to check 10, 11 offices to make sure these lights are working is an incredible amount of money. So I know we touched upon saving on energy, but there's all these other areas, like Rajiv said, trying to find a device or a person, you know, and so there's so many facets of savings, but I think that the big one that we talked around is definitely energy and around sustainability.
So the other thing I just wanted to discuss was that around now, these government buildings with post-pandemic as well as these hybrid working policies, those buildings are underutilized, right? So they are, even though those underutilized, organization doesn't have the right capability, right tools to understand the space utilization and occupancy, right?
So with people working at home a lot of the time,
the dynamics change, doesn't it?
The dynamics change, and they use the fixed set points, fixed schedules to cool or heat even for lights. So it's a huge waste of energy, right? And so what we can do is with the network, we can understand the occupancy, understand the space utilization, and give the organizations that visibility into the building, and maybe if it's not utilized, the space is utilized, they may be able to repurpose that space for the betterment of the community, right? So those are the things that we can work on top of the network infrastructure they already have.
Yeah, and that's a good point, isn't it, in the public sector? Because I know just in my local town, the library now is available.
It's like a one-stop shop.
But they've closed down the registry office and sold that building, and then they've put the registry office inside the library so that they can mix the schedule and get the utilisation.
But the only way you can really make those decisions is by having data. And again, it all goes back to data.
You're making the right decision.
To know you're making the right decision. So how popular, how utilised was the registry space before? Ditto with the library. And what we probably found is that, and it may have been a manual study, it often is. We're back to inefficiency again.
Clickers.
It's quicker. Seriously, I mean, I've worked with many customers who, unfortunately, because maybe they can't afford it at the time, or they're just not aware of what's possible, they employ a third-party company to go in, literally walking around with a clipboard, looking at how spaces are being used. And I don't need to tell everyone how inefficient that is. So, as Rajiv quite rightly is alluding to, we can be really smart about that, and we can use sensors that provide ongoing analysis of how a space is being used.
And as it changes.
As it changes as well, and what effect has a particular change had, you know? So your example is a great one, happening in my local town as well. They've actually shut down a library and moved it into a school because they realised that there was a part of the school that was underutilised because the maybe the birth rates have changed. You know, they don't need as much space in the school.
And they probably don't need as much office space because that, to your point, in certain buildings. Yeah, it's fascinating.
I think the dynamic of how we work as well, whether it's public or private sector, has changed as well.
Yeah.
Cisco use a phrase which is make the office a magnet, not a mandate. And for
I like that.
Yeah, and for John and I, we were chatting around this. So I'm based in Leeds, so I go where required. You know, whether it's Oxford with ITGL or the city office or Glasgow or Manchester. And the reality is what we've done, and again we can share this. You know, the team at ITGL already have this, but we have a lot of data around how we flipped our office from being 70% kind of desk space and 30% collaboration space to completely the opposite. So it's now 70% collaboration space.
Nice.
And what I mean by collaboration is not necessarily our hardware, of which I'd love it to be our hardware.
Yeah.
But the reality is people going to the office to work and work on projects and stuff like that.
Because that's probably why they've gone into the office as opposed to work from home.
Yes.
They want to be with their team.
And what you tend to find is people aren't going into the office because they've got better security at home in terms of the way they access, better collaboration tools at home, albeit with a nostril view of a webcam. But the reality is the world's changed, and I think the pandemic only accelerated that kind of working from home.
Yeah.
And I think the encouragement to get people back into the office, and I know we'll talk around this later on, but we've just reopened one of our new offices in London. And I can't tell you how impressive it is, but the thing that impressed me was the amount of people that are now coming back into the office.
Yeah,
right?
because they're excited about it.
They're excited. The technology works, you know, and I know Rajif and the team at ITGL are building out their own experience centre as well, right? So I think from my point of view, if you can make the technology better in the office as well, that's going to draw people back in. And it goes back to this kind of what we said around the amount of workspace. We also found in our New York office in Atlanta, we actually shrinked some of the square footage as well. So that's going to save money. So there's so many things, but I love what John said. It's about the data.
Yeah.
And the nice thing for us and ITGL is I know they look after a lot of Cisco customers that they have, and they already have the hardware. So you probably tend to find, and Rajif can probably talk around this, that he's probably got some of the data. He just needs to have conversations with those customers around, this is what we already know, to give that baseline, as John said.
Yeah.
And I think that's the really important thing, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that you talk about user experience. So in a smart building, that's also a prominent factor, the user experience. So again, if I go back to public sector organizations, many kind of users use those government buildings, right? It can be the government employees, NHS staff, patients, students, teachers, and the residents. So the experience, the better built environment means a better experience, right? So for example, like a hospital, right? So the patient recovery solely depend on the environment around him. So if he has poor environment factors like carbon dioxide or even poor lighting and poor temperature controls, that means the patient recovery will be, it will definitely negatively impact the patient recovery, right?
Yeah.
So if we can monitor first and measure this and give that dynamic with the APIs, the open APIs we have, give that information to the building management systems, the lighting systems, so they can dynamically control the environment.
Yeah.
Not only the patient recovery will be more effective, it will affect the staff as well, right?
Of course,
for their well-being as well and for their efficiency as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? There are so many layers to it, and that's one of the reasons the public sector is so interesting, because there's all those different use cases. So
I don't know whether to jump in here, but I'm going to. So this is a scenario I've genuinely seen, and I've walked through a hospital, which wasn't my local hospital, but I know lots of hospitals have our Cisco network in, and I know the guys at ITGL have a lot of those customers as well, which is amazing. But one of the things that we haven't touched upon is the ability to have like a Google Maps experience within a building.
Oh my gosh, I think about that all the time. Like my local hospital is a maze, as I'm sure you were going to say.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I don't know where radiology is. I've never been here before.
But there's a couple of use cases, Charlotte, right? So it's not necessarily funny, but I was dressed as an elf.
I feel like
that is funny.
So Cisco do this giving. We do these giving back days, and a lot of Cisco staff give donations, and we went and gave presents to sick children in a hospital in the northwest. So nice. I'm dressed as an elf. Yeah. The funny bit for me was walking around trying to find where I was going. Yeah. So going back to John's point, because it's a very old building. Yeah. It wasn't my local one,
and there's often lots of different buildings.
Yeah, and elves aren't normally 6'2" as well. But
apart from Buddy.
So from my point of view, when I looked up and I saw our access points, the first thing that I could think of is we need to see if we can get Cisco spaces deployed in this location. Yeah. Because what that could do, I'll give you an example, is you could send a text message out. So Eleanor and the team at ITGL could organise for a text message to come out and say, here is your appointment. You're due in this clinic at this time. And I know that's not necessarily smart building, but using a contact center software, you'll know that the text or the WhatsApp's been received. You know that you can deliver the messaging and the maps. And then you can give a hyperlink to a soft application. You don't even need to install an app on someone's phone now. They would click the link. And when they get into the building, they literally will walk from A to B like you will with Google Maps. So
that is great.
Think of when TomToms came out and SatNav and how we went from having a map. Yeah. That's where I believe we are today. We're on a map, but the reality is the technology is there. And again, you can see this at ITGL's offices and you can see it in our environment as well.
Well, and that brings us a good thing to finish on because we're almost out of time. I mean, because I suspect we could be here for quite a while. But you are going to sort of issue an open invitation.
Yeah, so I think, so one of the things that Cisco have done is our real estate, certainly the team are looking into how we put our own technologies, drink our own champagne. And literally 2 weeks ago, we just opened up our brand new city office floor. It's in Finsbury Circus. So we're doing active tours with partners and customers. So one of the things that we spoke about, Charlotte, was, look, there's an open invitation and Rajif and the team at ITGL know that. So I'd love for any of your customers that want to come in, just get into contact with the guys at ITGL and we'll help facilitate VIP tours with myself and John and the team. But you can actually see the technology we have.
And great to generate ideas for them, for their own spaces.
But I mean, our customers do want to see. You only get so far with slides, right?
Is this real?
They actually want to see it working somewhere. And as Nick says, so we've now got an office literally on our doorstep with pretty much all of our solution. So
fantastic, really exciting. So, well, thank you all very much. I think personally, I found this very interesting. I love to learn about all this stuff. It's quite fascinating. And like I said, it can impact people in so many different ways. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you.